Yo gamers, on the left side you have Dying Light the Beast on high preset at 1080p resolution, and on the right side 1440p with the DLSS balance and all the tricks that I will share with you in this video. If it's helpful to you and you want to stick around on the channel, please consider subscribing and leaving a like. Before we even go to the settings comparison, one of the biggest issues that I encountered was significant stuttering. It turned out to be a reflex setting, which is why I highly recommend to disable it. If you watch this video in the future, after multiple patches, still keep an eye on this option in case it's not fixed and you still experience inconsistent frame times. Another interesting trick, which is basically free performance, is turning on ReBAR feature for the Dying Light profile. And to do this, download Nvidia Inspector, link as always in the description, open it, and in the top right corner type Dying, and pick the beast profile. Scroll to ReBAR, turn it on, and apply the settings. The AMD equivalent of ReBAR is Smart Access Memory. In both cases, remember that you first have to enable it in the BIOS. Another interesting trick worth trying is downgrading DLSS 4 to DLSS 3. Don't get me wrong, I know DLSS 4 usually looks better and I use it in many titles myself, but after comparing it for longer, I have to say it actually looks good enough, especially since it gives me 8% more FPS. Again, go to the Nvidia Inspector, open the beast profile, find DLSS override, and turn it on. I personally like preset F, but preset C looks a bit better in the Dying Light and is sharper, so pick that one. Apply changes, done. For texture quality, I would say it's safe to go high even with the 8GB VRAM card. Level of detail have only 2 stages and the differences between them are barely noticeable. I still recommend setting it to high as it's not very demanding, but what really is affecting the draw distance is draw distance multiplier. The most obvious difference is, surprisingly, the draw distance for shadows. The higher the value, the further shadows are rendered in detail, more defined. While I generally appreciate having the option to extend it, my recommendation is actually to lower it to the minimum, which is 100. The alternative long distance shadows aren't bad. Obviously you can try staying at 140, which is equivalent to the high preset, but staying on 100 most of the time you won't notice downgrade. The biggest issue with 100 is that in some scenarios you can notice higher quality shadows popping up. I still think it's worth it. For particles quality I couldn't find a single instance of a difference between medium and high. Even fire effect looked the same, and performance seems to confirm it. I'm not sure if this option is even working right now, so I recommend staying on high for ego. Shadows quality is another surprise. I played a lot of games and I've never seen a case where the difference between the lowest and highest shadow settings is only 4% of FPS. The higher the option, the shadows are a bit less shimmery and more blurry, but only very slightly. I can report that it doesn't affect shadow render distance at all, which as you could see earlier seems to be tied entirely to the draw distance multiplier slider. Screen space shadows is an interesting option that I personally recommend keeping turned on. The only downside is that if there is something between the shadow and the camera, even transparent texture, it can cause artifacts. If you are sensitive to such artifacts, turn it off, but as you can see, it provides quite a lot to the visuals. Ambient Occlusion is a crucial setting for much better visuals and it's also surprisingly very cheap in this game. I definitely recommend high, although except for none, pretty much all settings look decent. The difference is like day and night, especially indoors. Global Illumination is another setting that shows no signs of functioning. Performance-wise, I couldn't measure any meaningful difference either. I suspect that some of the options might be intended for ray tracing, which hasn't been released yet. Reflections quality seems to affect only SSR so far. The difference is very tiny and it should be one of the first options to cut if you need performance, especially since the reflections don't seem to affect cube maps textures. Fog quality is an interesting case. I couldn't find reliable differences in visuals, but it definitely does something, because performance drops with the setting. I suspect it actually functions like in the Assassin's Creed Anvil engine, where fog was sometimes responsible for some volumetric effects, like God rays. If you need performance, it's another option to drop, since you very likely won't notice any difference. Post-processing effects, once again, either don't function or are barely noticeable, with no performance cost. As you've probably noticed, I'm playing at 1440p with upscaling, but my display is actually only 1080p. So here is another tip. If you have a small monitor, using DLDSR is a game changer. What DLDSR exactly is, you can see in the Digital Foundry video. They absolutely nail it. Link in the description.
The edge of the tub and the aliasing there. The DLDSR result is actually smoothing the edge with an anti-alias look with gradients and everything.
You can enable DLDSR resolution multipliers by going to the Nvidia control panel. Open Graphics tab, then Global Settings, click on DSR factors and tick everything from the top to the bottom. The most important resolution multipliers are at the top. I use sharpness on 0 because DLDSR 1.78 is already quite sharp. Apply and done. To make sure it works for borderless games, change also resolution of your desktop to the multiplier of your choice. For 1080p it's accordingly 1440p and 1620p. These are my settings recommendations. Of course it's kind of funny that it's pretty much all on high with some tricks, but at the end, the performance to visuals ratio matters, and with this I think you will be satisfied. If you desperately need more performance, drop shadows, reflections and fog to low. That will provide you around 10% more performance without big visual losses, just as you could see previously in the setting comparison. That's everything I've prepared for this video. If you found it useful, please consider subscribing to my channel and leaving a comment. I'm open to criticism to improve my content. And see you soon, Beast!